Hi, this is Jim Peters, President of the Responsible Hospitality Institute. We're here to continue our monthly series, Tuesday Forums on timely topics with real-time chats. Today's session is about managing the street as a venue. For those of you who haven't participated in our Tuesday Forum, like I said, it's a monthly event on the second Tuesday of the month, and it's an open format. There's no formal presentations other than this introduction, and we consider everybody on the forum is an expert. The way that it's structured is that we break people up into small discussion groups of about 6 people, and then they spend 30 minutes focusing in on the discussion topics, and then designate a representative who comes out and makes a report on the summary of their group. For those of you who are looking at having a night manager in your city, the Tuesday, October 11th will provide that opportunity for you. So the Managing the Street as a Venue Tuesday Forum focused on these discussion topics. How has public space activity become an attraction in and of itself? Do people come to a district or an area as much to go into venues as to experience the street and the people and just generally experiencing the activities on the street, especially if your area brings in alternative entertainment such as buskers and street performers, or have street markets, or provide food trucks or food vendors. The street becomes an attraction in and of itself versus just going into one venue and then leaving. Over COVID, we saw an expansion of parklets and streeteries as a way to provide the dining establishments, in particular, expanded seating so that they could continue to provide their customers with food and create that social space for them to interact. Increasingly, in our experience, we've seen more youth coming into the public space, and sometimes they're there to just do what everybody else does, experience the street as a venue. But in some cases, they could contribute to disruptions. This could either be on the streets or riding scooters, through traffic, or even doing street races and other types of disruptions. We really want to explore how people have begun to manage curbside space. Curbside is becoming valuable a resource. Not only has it been principally used for parking, but now some of those same areas have been taken over by loading zones for takeout delivery drivers and pick up and drop off places for taxis and e-hail services. The question is, how do all of these changes in the public space affected the access to this curb space? And what impact does that have on traffic and the disbursement of crowds at a closing time? And which stakeholders are involved in coordinating curb space and public space activities? So this is really what we have as our discussion topics. And now you're going to be able to hear the summary from this particular Tuesday forum. And we welcome you back every month for our Tuesday forum. Thanks again. Look forward to seeing you in the future.
So the first thing we really talked about was if our downtown areas have become attraction areas recently. I said for Raleigh, ours really hasn't changed too much. Our hospitality district I mentioned is booming. So our downtown area is kind of split up into different districts. So we have our hospitality district where our largest concentration of bars and restaurants and nightlife activity is. And then we have our Fayetteville Street district area, which saw some civil unrest in 2020 and has been struggling a little bit more. So we did both talk about our to-go district and social district. So Savannah has a to-go district for to-go beverages, and Raleigh just started a social district, which is essentially the same thing, an outdoor drinking refreshment area. We're in a pilot period. We started in August. We kind of talked about some challenges and different things that both of us do. North Carolina legislation requires stickers on the cups to identify where the drink is coming from for business liability and whatnot. Savannah does not do that. We have similar time constraints and no glass and size requirements and whatnot. We also talked about how to mitigate any risk in your downtown nightlife areas. In Savannah, they talked about some buildings that have stadium style lighting that is much brighter in designated areas. One thing I did not say, since Eddie, you brought that up after me, one thing actually Rachel spearheaded for our office is in our hospitality district area is getting a lot of our Duke Energy light poles increased on their wattage, but also balancing where the bars and the restaurants and the parking areas are versus where residents are, because you don't want to increase the lighting where residents might live and then they have lights shining in their windows. We did talk about our housing compromised population, which is obviously prevalent in all cities, and how to address what's going on with social districts or just special events or anything downtown in those areas. But we all agreed that that, again, is a problem everywhere, and it is a social problem above just our realm of responsibilities. With events returning post-COVID and whatnot, Raleigh, our events are booming. We haven't really lost any events. If anything, we've added more. But Savannah did say that they've lost a few, but their tourism numbers are still extremely high because there's still plenty of people that want to go and visit Savannah. And we kind of just ended on a note that security is obviously still important no matter what, whether it's related to nightlife, special events, hospitality, and how to make people feel safe when they're visiting, but also making sure that our staff and people working downtown are safe as well.
So first up, we talked about public space activity becoming the attraction itself. We had a lot of discussion on this. Some repeat from what Whitney's said here. Raleigh talked about, of course, special events. Those activate our streets and our public spaces. But outside of that, yeah, Raleigh talked about the open container social district area. That's an interesting topic that got a lot of discussion. That it's positive there. There haven't been negative impacts to that. That I think we all discussed that in a very heavy nightlife and entertainment district area, especially with the high concentration of bars focused on high volume alcohol sales, that would not be a good fit. We would not want to see that, for example, in Austin, in districts that have those kinds of characteristics, because that, frankly, and this is what I talked about, would exacerbate our problems. The other thing that I focused on is the need to make sure that the space is both designed and programmed for it. When you leave it as a free-for-all, that's typically not good. Maybe in an area without a lot of activity, that can be fine, but I think as a best practice, it ought to be designed and programmed for the activity. And Whitney, I think, and Rachel actually talked about that very thing, how the city is now looking at putting tables out in the public space for folks to sit and hopefully encourage more coming and going, sitting, enjoying that beverage, and then kind of moving on. Let's see, Bloomington and Mississauga kind of talked, this sort of blended into our seating, streeteries, parklet, sidewalk seating, dining, because they both really focused on the positive elements of that, how both COVID and kind of post-COVID, that's been a real positive activation of streeteries, sidewalk seating and dining. Bloomington, I think, brought up an interesting point here. They don't have open container officially, but people are doing it anyway. And so they're focusing on education there, because that's not something they want to encourage. Raleigh brought up a super interesting thing that I don't know if Whitney talked about in their group as we move on to streeteries, that the city actually has $500,000 to install parklets and streeteries for the business at no cost to them. So it's interested to see how that goes. Bloomington kind of brought us in another direction and making sure that maintenance is accounted for in the streeteries. Charles had to himself deal with like maintenance issues related to some of these streeteries where that wasn't happening. We didn't have a huge amount of discussion on youth disruption. Pomona brought up some kind of typical stuff like bicycles and skateboards. I brought up an issue that is not really only youth, but we are seeing, especially in areas where the bars are all 21 and up and the youth are outside, issues with fights, with guns being brought to that area. Those are youth, because it's not just youth doing it, but there are youth there. Our last topic really focused on management of sort of sidewalk space and curb space in front of bars, restaurants, clubs, issues where line queuing is sort of spilling out and there's not enough room for it. And one of the things we talked about, Austin's looking at, is taking parking and using it for line queuing and line management. The other thing, Raleigh talked about taking parking and using it for streeteries, for more drop-off. So I guess we're all looking at repurposing parking and using it for either streeteries, drop-off pickup, line queuing, those kinds of things.
One more thing that I didn't bring up during the conversation, and prior to my current position, I was actually working in a different city during the pandemic when it started, and basically commandeered the streets for curbside pickup like on day one. But we were at that time working on a pilot project. This is a suburb of the city of Los Angeles, to institute these streeteries, these outdoor parklets for restaurants. And we had already gotten through the LA City Council approval process on this pilot program. So we had the plans in place. We were literally ready to, start construction on these. The initial design of that program was like a 50-50, meaning that we were going to have the property owners pay 50% and then our organization would pay 50%. And then the pandemic hit. And literally just propelled us into as fast of action as we possibly could. The board at the time voted to just go ahead and assume the entire cost, because the restaurants had just been closed and devastated and all of that. And all of the other districts in the area were literally they were all jealous, I'll say, because we were able to spring into action because we had that. It literally saved some of these businesses. It literally just prevented them from going out of business. And so that was just like real proof in terms of how effective they were. Especially, just dumb luck. We had the timing right on that. So I just wanted to share that with everybody on how impactful that whole situation was.
On our breakout session, so we had this push to do aluminum to-go cups for a while. And the thought was that if we did aluminum to-go cups, and maybe people wouldn't throw them on the ground, and we just found a bunch of aluminum to-go cups on the ground because people don't want to carry them with them. And the idea was, oh, you'll take this home and then bring it back to you the next time you go to a bar. And no one's going to do that. No one's going to go get their little cup and bring it back with them. But we run into a large amount of waste from our to-go cup zone. And I was saying on our breakout session, there's half of the group down here is for it and half the group is against it, right? So there's, of course, you can imagine the residents are against it. They think it brings litter and debris and just bad behavior and everything else. Some of the establishments are against it, but a lot of obviously the bars and nightclubs are for it because it gives folks the ability to just pop into their bar, grab a drink and leave, when, at other times they couldn't do so, right? Because it's too packed in there, they're getting to capacity or what have you. But the biggest problem we run into is that 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. time period. And I think we're investigating that through our assessment, our sociable city assessment that's going on right now. And that's how do we lessen, if getting rid of our to-go cup zone is a third rail that no one is going to touch or no one wants to touch, if that's the case, and I don't know if we're at that point yet, but if it is, then how do we lessen the trash out there in the evening? And I think some of the answers we're looking at is telling bars and nightclubs no more to-go cups after a specific hour, 2 a.m. or whatnot, right? And also backing up their last call time, because we're finding out here at last call being 5 minutes before they close, people are grabbing 2 cups and a piece in their groups and going outside and pounding them and then tossing them on the ground. So there's just a lot that we're dealing with. The other pitfall that I've discussed that we're running into right now is we have an emerging social district that's south of downtown, but kind of midtown to our neighborhoods, called the Starland District, and it's now becoming the locals downtown because the locals don't want to go down to River Street or the market. They want to go to all the bars and nightclubs in that area where they all know each other. And that area does not have a to-go cup zone. So they deal with the frustration of not being able to take part in the same things that downtown does.
Hi, this is Jim Peters again. I want to thank you for participating in this video presentation. Please go to our website, sociablecity.org, to learn more about the different programs and upcoming events that we have. Thanks again. Bye.